Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. New Beginnings. Marcus Wells adjusted his tie as he looked out the kitchen window of his suburban home in Cedar Falls. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn where his two children, Bradley and Emily, were playing catch. At 35, Marcus had built a comfortable life as a corporate security consultant, using his military background and sharp analytical mind to help companies protect their assets. His wife Stephanie was preparing breakfast, her blonde hair catching the light as she moved gracefully around the kitchen. "Dad, look," 10-year-old Bradley called out, making an impressive catch that had 8-year-old Emily clapping enthusiastically. Marcus smiled, feeling that familiar warmth of contentment. 3 years of marriage to Stephanie had given him the family he'd always wanted after his first wife died in a car accident. "Honey, there's a moving truck next door," Stephanie said, peering through the lace curtains. "Looks like we're finally getting new neighbors." Marcus had been wondering about the vacant house for months. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had moved to Florida, leaving the property empty. He watched as burly movers unloaded furniture in boxes, supervised by a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and weathered features. "I should go introduce myself," Marcus said, always one to be neighborly. His military training had taught him the importance of knowing who was around you. "Wait until evening, dear. Let them get settled first," Stephanie suggested, kissing his cheek. Her touch was soft, but Marcus noticed she seemed tense, her eyes lingering on the moving truck longer than necessary. That evening, Marcus walked over with a bottle of wine and a homemade apple pie Stephanie had insisted on baking. The man who answered the door had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Straight posture, firm handshake, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Theodore Shelton," the man introduced himself. "Just moved in from Phoenix. Retired after 30 years with the police force. Homicide detective, mostly. Marcus Wells. I live right next door with my wife and kids. Welcome to the neighborhood." Theodore's house was spartanly furnished but impeccably organized. Military precision, Marcus recognized. As they shared the wine, Theodore proved to be excellent company. Intelligent, well-traveled, with a dry sense of humor that reminded Marcus of his old drill sergeant. "What brings you to Cedar Falls?" Marcus asked. "Wanted a quiet place to write my memoirs. Too many memories in Phoenix." Theodore's expression darkened briefly. "Plus, my pension goes further here. What about you? What's your story?" Marcus found himself opening up to this stranger, sharing how he'd met Stephanie at a corporate conference in Denver 2 years ago. She'd been working in event management. He'd been consulting on security protocols. Love at first sight, he'd thought. She'd moved to Cedar Falls within 6 months, and they'd married shortly after. "She's from Colorado originally," Marcus explained. Small-town girl who always dreamed of a family life in the suburbs. Theodore nodded, but Marcus caught something in his expression, a flicker of interest that went beyond polite conversation. "What was her maiden name? I might know some folks from Colorado." "Farmer. Stephanie Farmer. Though she lived in several places growing up, military family, you know how it is." "Indeed I do." Theodore's response was neutral, but Marcus noticed the detective's fingers drumming against his wine glass, a subtle tell that suggested deeper thought. They talked until late, and Marcus left feeling he'd made a good friend. Theodore seemed like the kind of man you could count on, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with protecting a family. As Marcus walked back across the lawn, he noticed Stephanie watching from the bedroom window. When he waved, she stepped back quickly, the curtain falling closed. Chapter 2. Watchful Eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, Theodore proved to be an ideal neighbor. He helped Marcus fix a stubborn sprinkler head, shared coffee on weekend mornings, and even played catch with Bradley and Emily when their father was working late. The kids adored him, especially when he showed them his old police badge and told sanitized stories about catching bad guys. Marcus appreciated having another man around who understood the value of vigilance. Theodore had installed a comprehensive security system in his house. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. "Old habits," he'd explained with a shrug. What Marcus didn't know was that Theodore's old habits extended far beyond home security. The retired detective had developed an insatiable curiosity about his new neighbor's wife. Something about Stephanie Farmer Wells didn't sit right with him. Call it 30 years of detective instincts, but the woman set off every alarm bell in his head. It started with small observations. The way she tensed whenever Theodore was around. How she always seemed to have an excuse to go inside when he was talking to Marcus in the yard. The practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. And then there was the physical reaction. Theodore had seen enough guilty people to recognize the micro-expressions of someone hiding something significant. Theodore began what he called a background verification, old police terminology for digging into someone's past. He started with public records, social media, anything available online. Stephanie Wells had remarkably little digital footprint for a woman her age. Her social media profiles only went back 3 years, coinciding with when she'd moved to Cedar Falls. Before that, nothing. Her employment history was similarly thin. The event management company in Denver confirmed she'd worked there, but only for 8 months. Previous employment was listed as various hospitality positions, with no specific companies named. Her Colorado driver's license had been issued just 6 months before she'd moved to Cedar Falls. It was as if Stephanie Farmer had materialized out of thin air 3 years ago. Theodore's detective instincts kicked into high gear. In his experience, people who lived such carefully curated lives were usually running from something. He began making discreet inquiries with old contacts, running Stephanie's name and description through databases he technically no longer had access to, but which former colleagues were willing to check as a favor. Meanwhile, Marcus remained blissfully unaware of his neighbor's investigation. He was dealing with a challenging case at work. A tech company suspected their security protocols had been compromised, and Marcus was spending long hours analyzing their systems for vulnerabilities. Stephanie seemed unusually supportive during this stressful period, bringing him coffee during late-night work sessions, massaging his shoulders when he was hunched over his laptop. She was the perfect wife, almost too perfect. When Marcus mentioned Theodore's background in law enforcement, she'd made a comment about feeling safer with a cop in the neighborhood, but he'd noticed her hands shake slightly as she said it. "You know, Theodore's really taken to the kids," Marcus said one evening as they watched a movie. Bradley asked if he could teach him about detective work. "I don't think that's appropriate," Stephanie replied quickly, then softened her tone. "I mean, children shouldn't be exposed to that kind of darkness. Police work involves some terrible things." Marcus found her concern touching, another sign of her protective maternal instincts. He didn't notice the way her eyes kept darting to the window, where Theodore's house stood silhouetted against the evening sky. 3 days later, Theodore's inquiries bore fruit. A contact in the Colorado State Police called him back with information that made his blood run cold. Stephanie Farmer wasn't just hiding a past. She was hiding an identity. The real Stephanie Farmer had died in a car accident in rural Colorado 5 years ago. Whoever was living in Marcus Wells' house had stolen a dead woman's identity and constructed an entirely new life. But that was just the beginning. When Theodore cross-referenced the physical description with missing persons and unsolved cases, he found something that made 30 years of police work seem like preparation for this moment. The woman calling herself Stephanie Farmer matched the description of someone suspected in at least 3 cases of spousal murder across different states. The methods were always the same: wealthy men, brief courtships, marriages that ended with the husband's deaths ruled as accidents or suicides, and wives who disappeared shortly after collecting life insurance payouts. Theodore spent the next week building his case, cross-referencing dates, locations, and financial records he could access through old contacts. The pattern was undeniable. The woman next door wasn't just a fraud. She was a serial killer who specialized in murdering husbands. And Marcus Wells, with his military benefits, his successful consulting business, and his life insurance policy, fit the profile perfectly. Chapter 3. The Warning. Theodore knew he had to act carefully. 30 years of police work had taught him the difference between suspicion and proof, and while his evidence was compelling, it was largely circumstantial. More importantly, He needed to warn Marcus without putting the children in immediate danger. He'd been watching the house more closely, noting patterns in Stephanie's behavior. She'd been making more frequent trips to the bank, had purchased a new laptop that she kept hidden in her car, and most tellingly, had started researching vacation destinations on her phone, places with no extradition treaties. Theodore's break came when Marcus mentioned that Stephanie would be taking the kids to her sister's house for the weekend. Theodore knew from his research that Stephanie Farmer had been an only child. Whatever she was planning, she was setting up an alibi. Friday evening, Theodore watched from his window as Stephanie loaded the children into her car. She'd been acting strangely all week, more affectionate with Marcus, constantly taking photos, creating what Theodore recognized as the behavior of someone preparing to stage a grieving widow's memories. An hour after Stephanie left, Theodore made his move. He walked across the yard carrying a bottle of whiskey and a manila envelope that contained printouts of everything he discovered. Marcus answered the door, looking tired but pleased to see his neighbor. Perfect timing, Theodore. Stephanie took the kids to visit her sister, so I'm just catching up on some work. Want to share that bottle? They settled by the fireplace in Marcus's living room. Theodore had been in the house before, but tonight he was seeing it through a detective's eyes. Family photos from the past 3 years. No pictures of Stephanie from before she'd moved to Cedar Falls. Marcus's military commendations on the wall, his business awards, everything that would make him an attractive target for someone like the woman he'd married. Marcus, Theodore began carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to hear me out completely before you react. Marcus looked up from pouring the whiskey, noting the serious tone. Sure, what's on your mind? Where exactly did you say your wife lived before she met you? Denver. Well, originally Colorado Springs, but she was working in Denver when we met. Marcus handed Theodore a glass. Why do you ask? Theodore leaned forward, his voice dropping to the tone he'd used when interrogating suspects. I'm sorry, but I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Your wife is not who she claims to be. Marcus laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. What do you mean? Theodore grabbed Marcus's arm, his grip firm and urgent. Get your children and leave this house. Tonight. The laughter died on Marcus's lips when he saw the deadly serious expression on Theodore's face. What the hell are you talking about? Theodore pressed the manila envelope into Marcus's hand. The woman you married stole the identity of a dead person. The real Stephanie Farmer died in a car accident 5 years ago. Whoever is living in your house has been married at least 3 times before, and all her previous husbands are dead. Marcus tore open the envelope, his hands shaking as he scanned the documents inside. Death certificates, police reports, newspaper clippings, financial records. All painting a picture of a woman who moved from state to state, marrying wealthy men who died under suspicious circumstances. This can't be right, Marcus whispered, but even as he said it, pieces began falling into place. Stephanie's reluctance to talk about her past, her lack of long-term friendships, the way she'd rushed their relationship, her insistence on updating his life insurance policy just last month. Look at the timeline. Theodore pointed to a highlighted section. Phoenix, Arizona. Martin Prince died of apparent suicide 6 months after marriage. Left her $2 million in insurance. Dallas, Texas. Spencer Wagner fell downstairs and broke his neck, another $1 million policy. Portland, Oregon, Jorge Boyer, carbon monoxide poisoning in his garage, ruled accidental. Marcus's blood ran cold as he read the details. Each case followed the same pattern. Wealthy widower or divorced man, whirlwind romance, quick marriage, life insurance updates, and within a year an accidental death followed by the widow's mysterious disappearance after collecting the insurance money. The children, Marcus said suddenly, standing up so fast he knocked over his chair. She has my children. We need to call the police right now, Theodore said, reaching for his phone. But Marcus, there's something else. According to the GPS tracking on the credit card she used today, she never went to any sister's house. She checked into a motel about 50 miles from here under a different name. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. The woman he'd loved, trusted with his children, shared his bed with for 3 years, was a professional killer who'd been planning his death. Every kiss, Every laugh, every moment of apparent happiness had been a lie designed to position her to murder him. Why now? Marcus asked, his analytical mind cutting through the emotional shock. What changed? Theodore spread out additional documents. She's been draining your joint accounts gradually, small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. But yesterday, she tried to transfer the maximum amount allowable without your signature. When that was blocked, she called your insurance company asking about policy details. Marcus stared at a bank statement showing hundreds of small withdrawals over the past 6 months. Money he'd never missed, taken by a woman he'd trusted completely. She's planning to kill me this weekend, Marcus said quietly. That's why she took the kids away, so they wouldn't be here to witness it or get hurt, or to use them as leverage if you discovered the truth, Theodore added grimly. Marcus, we need to move fast. Get whatever you need, and let's get to the police station. I have contacts in the FBI who can help coordinate with local authorities to find your children. Marcus grabbed his keys, his wallet, and his laptop containing all his financial information. As they headed for the door, he paused, looking around the house that had been his sanctuary, now revealed as a carefully constructed trap. Theodore, he said as they stepped into the night air. How did you know? What made you suspicious? The old detective smiled grimly. 30 years of catching killers teaches you to recognize predators. Your wife moves like someone who's always calculating angles, always watching for threats. Plus, she made one critical mistake. What mistake? She chose to live next door to a retired homicide detective who solved more murder cases than she's probably committed. Theodore's eyes were hard as steel. And Marcus? We're going to make sure she never hurts another family again. Chapter 4. The hunt begins. The Cedar Falls police station buzzed with unusual activity for a Friday night. Detective Patricia Gould, the lead investigator, had been briefed by Theodore and was now coordinating with multiple law enforcement agencies. Marcus sat in a conference room, staring at crime scene photos of Stephanie's previous victims, while FBI agent Herbert McPherson worked his laptop, tracking financial records and communications. Your wife, or rather, the person you know as Stephanie, has been operating under at least 5 different identities over the past decade, Agent McPherson explained. Her real name appears to be Cheryl Brock, though even that might be an alias. She's wanted in connection with 7 suspicious deaths across 6 states. Marcus felt nauseous looking at the photos of men who looked disturbingly similar to him. Successful, trusting, the kind of men who believed in love at first sight. My children, he said for the 10th time. We need to find my children. We've issued an Amber Alert, Detective Gould assured him. Every law enforcement officer in a 3-state area is looking for her vehicle. The credit card she used at the motel is being monitored, and we have units en route to that location now. Theodore, who'd been making calls to old contacts, hung up his phone with a grim expression. Bad news. The motel clerk confirms she checked in alone and left around 8 p.m. Paid cash for an additional night, but never returned to the room. She knows we're onto her, Marcus said, his military training helping him stay focused despite the panic clawing at his chest. She's gone off-grid. Agent McPherson pulled up a map on his laptop. Based on her past patterns, she has multiple exit strategies planned. Fake IDs, cash reserves, probably stolen vehicles. But she's never had to operate with 2 children before. That limits her options. It also makes her more dangerous, Theodore added. Cornered predators become unpredictable. Marcus stood up, pacing the small room. His analytical mind was working overtime, processing everything he'd learned about the woman he'd thought he'd known. She's not going to run yet, he said suddenly. What do you mean? Detective Gould asked. Think about it. She's invested 3 years in this setup. I'm worth more to her dead than alive. My life insurance policy is worth $4 million, plus my business assets, retirement accounts, everything. She's not going to abandon that kind of payoff. Theodore nodded slowly. You think she's planning to complete the job? I know she is. Marcus turned to face the room. She took my children as insurance, but she also took them to establish her alibi. She's going to come back, probably late Sunday night when I'd normally be asleep. She'll make it look like a home invasion gone wrong, or maybe stage a suicide. Then she'll return from her sister's house Monday morning to discover my body. Agent McPherson was already typing on his laptop. If you're right, we can set a trap. Use your house as bait. Absolutely not, Detective Gould interjected. Too dangerous. We don't risk civilian lives. With respect, Detective, Marcus said, his voice taking on the authority he'd learned as a military officer. She's going to come for me, whether we set a trap or not. At least this way, we control the situation. Theodore leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the eyes of someone who'd seen good men make hard choices. What are you thinking? Marcus moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a floor plan of his house. She knows my routines, my habits, my security system. She's been planning this for months, probably since before she even married me. But she doesn't know that I know. Go on, Agent McPherson encouraged. She'll expect me to be alone, probably working late in my home office like I do most Sunday nights. She has keys, knows the alarm code, and she's familiar with every entrance and exit. Marcus drew arrows showing probable entry points. But what she doesn't know is that I've had 3 years to study her patterns too. Marcus turned to face the group. Stephanie, Cheryl, whatever her name is, has one weakness that all her previous victims didn't have. What's that? Detective Gould asked. Me. Marcus's eyes were cold as winter steel. I'm not some lovesick businessman who trusts blindly. I'm a former Army Ranger who spent 2 tours in Afghanistan hunting insurgents. I've been studying security systems and threat assessment for 15 years. And now I know exactly what kind of predator I'm dealing with. Theodore smiled grimly. You want to turn the hunter into the hunted. Exactly. But first, we need to find my children and make sure they're safe. Then we end this. Agent McPherson's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, then looked up with urgent eyes. We've got movement on one of her known credit cards. She just purchased gas and supplies at a truck stop about 30 miles north of here. Supplies? Marcus asked. Rope, duct tape, and a large cooler. Agent McPherson's expression was grim. Also 2 children's meals from the attached restaurant. The room went silent as the implications sank in. Stephanie wasn't just planning to kill Marcus. She was preparing to dispose of witnesses. How long ago? Theodore demanded. 15 minutes. State police are en route, but she'll be gone by the time they arrive. Marcus felt ice water flowing through his veins. His children were in the hands of a serial killer who was preparing to eliminate them as loose ends. Every instinct screamed at him to grab a gun and hunt her down personally, but his training told him to stay calm and think strategically. She's stalling, he said suddenly. She needs them alive until she completes her primary objective. Dead children before a husband's suicide would raise too many questions. So what's her plan? Detective Gould asked. Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to think like the predator who'd been sharing his bed. She kills me Sunday night, makes it look like suicide or accident. Monday morning, she returns from her sister's to find my body. She plays the grieving widow, collects the insurance money. Then, a few weeks later, she takes the kids on a healing vacation somewhere remote, and he couldn't finish the sentence. Theodore's fists were clenched. Over my dead body. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Marcus said. All of us. Because when she comes for me Sunday night, we're going to be ready. And this time, the only person who's going to die is her. Chapter 5. The Predator's Past. While law enforcement agencies coordinated their search for Bradley and Emily Wells, Agent McPherson worked through the night, assembling a complete profile of the woman they were hunting. What he discovered painted a picture of a predator far more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Her real name is Cheryl and Brock. McPherson reported to the team assembled in the police station at dawn. Born in Michigan, father unknown, mother died when she was 12. Bounced through foster homes until she aged out of the system at 18. Marcus stared at crime scene photos spread across the conference table, trying to reconcile these images with the woman who'd made him pancakes just 2 days ago. When did she start killing? Best we can determine, her first victim was probably her foster father when she was 16. Thomas Daly, found dead of apparent heart failure. Natural causes, they thought, but the timing was suspicious, right after he'd been investigated for inappropriate conduct with foster children. Theodore, who'd been on the phone with contacts across multiple states, hung up and joined the briefing. It gets worse. I've been tracking her movements over the past 15 years. She's not just a Black Widow. She's a professional killer who uses marriage as her cover. Agent McPherson nodded. We've identified at least 9 victims, possibly more. She typically spends 6 months to 2 years establishing an identity in a new location, then targets wealthy men with minimal family connections. How does she kill them? Marcus asked, his voice emotionless despite the horror of discussing his wife's murder methods. She's evolved over time, McPherson explained, spreading out case files. Early victims were poisoned, usually something that mimicked heart attacks or strokes. Later, she got more creative, made deaths look like accidents, suicides, or random crimes. Detective Gould studied a timeline McPherson had created. There's something else. The intervals between kills have been getting shorter. First victim to second was 3 years. Most recent victims have been less than a year apart. She's escalating, Theodore observed. Classic serial killer behavior. The kills are becoming more frequent because the psychological satisfaction is decreasing. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She enjoyed it. All those nights lying next to me, she was fantasizing about killing me. Marcus, Agent McPherson said gently, there's something else you need to know. We found evidence that she's been documenting your relationship. Photos, videos, recordings. She keeps trophies from each victim. The room fell silent. Marcus remembered all the times Stephanie had insisted on taking pictures, recording videos of family moments, creating what he'd thought were precious memories. Now he realized she'd been collecting souvenirs of her next kill. Where are my children? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Theodore's phone rang before anyone could answer. He listened intently, then hung up with a grim expression. That was the FBI task force. They found her abandoned car at a rest stop near the state line. She switched vehicles. Stolen car. Worse, she carjacked a family traveling through. Father, mother, and teenage daughter. The parents are in the hospital, alive but badly beaten. The daughter. Theodore paused. The daughter is missing. Marcus stood up so violently his chair crashed to the floor. She has 3 children now? It appears that way. But Marcus, there's more. The carjacked vehicle has GPS tracking. Agent McPherson was already on his laptop, coordinating with the FBI's technical team. We're tracking the signal now. She's moving north, staying off major highways. She's heading for the mountains, Marcus realized. Somewhere remote where she can. He couldn't finish the thought. We have state police setting up roadblocks, Detective Gould assured him. Every law enforcement officer in the region is looking for that vehicle. Marcus walked to the window, staring out at the sunrise, painting the sky red. Somewhere out there, a monster wearing his wife's face had his children and was planning to kill them after she finished her work with him. Every minute that passed increased the danger they were in. I want to see your files, Marcus said suddenly. Everything. Every victim, every method, every psychological evaluation. If I want to be bait in this trap, I need to understand exactly how her mind works. Theodore frowned. Marcus, that's a lot of disturbing material. Are you sure you want to? She's been studying me for 3 years, Marcus interrupted. She knows every habit, every weakness, every vulnerability. If I'm going to beat her, I need to level the playing field. Agent McPherson hesitated, then opened his laptop. These files contain graphic crime scene photos, victim statements, psychological profiles. It's not easy material to review. Neither is burying my children, Marcus replied coldly. For the next 2 hours, Marcus immersed himself in the dark psychology of the woman he'd married. He read victim statements from the few people who'd survived encounters with Cheryl Brock. He studied crime scene analysis that revealed her methods of psychological manipulation. He reviewed psychiatric evaluations that painted a picture of a textbook psychopath, charming, intelligent, completely devoid of empathy. The most chilling discovery was a journal found in one of her abandoned apartments. Page after page of detailed notes about her victims, their routines, their fears, their weaknesses. She studied murder the way a scientist studied lab rats. She has a pattern, Marcus said suddenly, pointing to a section of the journal. Every victim goes through the same psychological conditioning. First, she isolates them from friends and family. Then she creates financial dependence. Finally, she induces a crisis that justifies the victim's death. Theodore leaned over his shoulder. What kind of crisis? Depression, business failures, health scares, anything that would explain a suicide or make an accident seem plausible. Marcus flipped through several pages. Look at this. Spencer Wagner's journal entries show he was convinced he had early-onset Alzheimer's. Jorge Boyer thought he was being investigated for tax fraud. Martin Prince believed his first wife's death had been his fault. She gaslights them into wanting to die, Agent McPherson realized, or at least into a mental state where their death seems inevitable. Marcus closed the journal, his jaw set with determination. But she made one critical mistake with me. What's that? Marcus looked around the room at the assembled law enforcement officers, at Theodore who'd risked everything to save a neighbor's life, at the pile of evidence that would bring a serial killer to justice. She underestimated my support network. Every other victim was isolated, alone, vulnerable. But I've got all of you. And when she comes for me tomorrow night, we're going to be ready. His phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus looked at the screen and felt his blood turn to ice. The message was from Stephanie's phone. Having a wonderful time with the kids. See you Sunday night, darling. We have so much to talk about. Red heart. Attached was a photo of Bradley and Emily tied up in what appeared to be an abandoned cabin, their eyes wide with terror above duct tape gags. She knows, Marcus said quietly. She knows we're on to her, and she's coming anyway. Chapter 6, The Trap. Saturday night. Marcus Wells sat in his darkened living room, surrounded by enough law enforcement technology to run a small military operation. FBI surveillance equipment monitored every entrance to his house, while sharpshooters positioned themselves in Theodore's house and the abandoned property across the street. Agent McPherson coordinated the operation from a command van parked 3 blocks away, while Detective Gould supervised the local response team. But Marcus felt utterly alone. The photo of his children haunted him. Bradley's brave attempt to look strong for his little sister. Emily's tears visible even in the grainy image. Somewhere in the mountains, a monster was holding them hostage, using their lives as leverage to force Marcus into a deadly game. Audio check. Theodore's voice whispered through Marcus's hidden earpiece. The retired detective was positioned in his house with a clear line of sight to Marcus's front door. Copy. Marcus replied softly. Any word on the search teams? Negative. She's chosen her location well. Probably one of hundreds of abandoned mining cabins in the national forest. But Marcus, we will find them. Marcus adjusted the Kevlar vest hidden beneath his shirt. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Cheryl would expect to find him alone, vulnerable, probably working late in his home office. Instead, she'd walk into a carefully orchestrated trap with enough firepower to stop a small army. The psychological profile suggested she'd arrive between 2 and 4 a.m., when her target would be asleep or exhausted. She'd use her keys to disable the alarm system, then make her way to the home office where Marcus typically worked late on Sunday nights. What she wouldn't expect was that every step would be monitored, every movement tracked, every possible escape route covered by law enforcement officers who'd been hunting serial killers longer than she'd been killing. Movement on the south perimeter. Agent McPherson's voice crackled through the earpiece. Single female, approaching through the tree line behind your house. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. After 36 hours of waiting, wondering, and planning, the moment of truth had arrived. Somewhere in the darkness, the woman who'd shared his bed for 3 years was approaching his house with murder on her mind. Remember, Theodore's voice was calm and steady. Stick to the plan. Let her come to you. We need her inside the house to make the arrest stick. Marcus moved to his home office, settling behind his desk with his laptop open to financial documents. Exactly what Cheryl would expect to find. The room was lit only by the computer screen, creating the perfect ambience for someone working alone late at night. Visual contact, another voice reported. Subject is wearing dark clothing, moving carefully toward the back door. She's carrying what appears to be a medical bag. A medical bag. Marcus shuddered, remembering the case files detailing how Cheryl had used untraceable drugs to incapacitate her victims before staging their deaths. The toxicology reports showed a sophisticated knowledge of pharmacology, substances that would induce heart attacks, strokes, or respiratory failure, while leaving minimal traces in the bloodstream. "She's at the back door," Detective Gould whispered. "Disabling the alarm system now." Marcus heard the faint beep that indicated his home security system had been deactivated. After 3 years, Cheryl knew every detail of his daily routines, including the alarm code he changed monthly. What she didn't know was that the FBI had installed a secondary system that couldn't be disabled from the main panel. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Marcus's fingers on the keyboard. He forced himself to maintain the appearance of a man absorbed in his work, oblivious to the predator stalking through his home. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Marcus's military training kicked in, every sense heightened to combat awareness while his outward appearance remained calm and focused on his computer screen. He could feel her presence now, the malevolent energy of someone who'd killed at least 9 people and was preparing to add him to her collection. "Subject is in the main hallway," Agent McPherson reported, moving toward the home office. Another creak, closer now. Marcus typed a few more lines of meaningless text, playing his role as the unsuspecting victim. In his peripheral vision, he caught a shadow moving past the office doorway. She was studying him, he realized, watching to ensure he was genuinely unaware of her presence. How many times had she done this before? How many husbands had she observed in their final moments of innocence? "Hello, darling." Marcus looked up from his computer, feigning surprise. Cheryl stood in the doorway, still beautiful, still carrying herself with the grace that had first attracted him. But now he could see what Theodore had recognized from the beginning. The predatory calculation behind her eyes, the practiced smile of someone who viewed other human beings as prey. "Stephanie, what are you doing here? I thought you were at your sister's with the kids." She stepped into the room, and Marcus noticed the medical bag in her left hand, a syringe partially visible at the top. "Change of plans. The kids are having such a wonderful time. I decided to come home early and surprise you." "How did you get in?" "The alarm should have." "Oh, you know me and technology," she laughed, the same musical sound that had once made his heart race. "I must have done something wrong. It didn't seem to be working." Marcus stood up, moving away from his desk as planned. He needed to draw her further into the room, away from potential escape routes. "Well, I'm glad you're back. I missed you." "Did you?" Her smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. "That's sweet. You know, Marcus, we need to talk about something important." "Of course. What's on your mind?" Cheryl moved closer, her free hand reaching out to touch his face in a gesture that would have seemed loving to any observer. "I know you've been under a lot of stress lately. The business, the finances, everything. Sometimes I worry about you." Here, it was the psychological conditioning Marcus had read about in her victim files. She was beginning the process of convincing him that death was inevitable, that suicide was the logical solution to his problems. "I'm fine, honey. Just working hard to provide for our family." "But are you really fine?" Her voice carried a note of manufactured concern. "You've been so distant lately, so withdrawn. I found some very troubling things when I was organizing your office earlier this week." Marcus felt a chill. "What kind of things?" "Financial documents that suggest your business is in serious trouble. Debt you haven't told me about. Legal problems that could destroy everything we've built together." Her hand moved to his shoulder, a gentle gesture that felt like a spider's touch. "Oh, Marcus, why didn't you tell me how bad things had gotten?" He stared at her in amazement. Even knowing what she was, even understanding her methods, he was impressed by the sheer audacity of her lies. She was trying to convince him that his successful business was failing, that he had debts and legal problems that didn't exist. "Stephanie, I don't know what documents you're talking about. The business is doing fine. We have no significant debts, and there are no legal issues." Her expression shifted to one of sympathetic concern. "Marcus, honey, I think the stress might be affecting your memory." You showed me those bankruptcy papers yourself last month. Remember? You were so upset about having to mortgage the house again. Gaslighting. She was trying to make him question his own sanity, to believe that his memory couldn't be trusted. How many other victims had she driven to genuine despair with these psychological manipulations? I think you might be confused, Marcus said carefully. Maybe you're thinking of someone else's problems. Cheryl's eyes flashed with something dangerous before the mask of concern returned. Oh, darling, this is worse than I thought. The memory loss, the confusion. Have you been to a doctor? Some of the symptoms you've been showing. Movement in the backyard. Theodore's voice whispered through the earpiece. We've got multiple subjects approaching the house. Marcus felt ice water in his veins. Multiple subjects meant Cheryl hadn't come alone. She'd brought backup, possibly his children as additional leverage. You know what, Marcus? Cheryl's voice took on a new tone, harder and more direct. I think we should sit down and discuss this properly. She reached into her medical bag and withdrew the syringe, no longer bothering to conceal it. This will help you relax while we talk about your situation. Stephanie, what is that? What are you doing? Just something to help with your anxiety. You've been so stressed lately, so paranoid. Did you really think I wouldn't find out that you've been investigating me? The mask was finally off. Marcus found himself face to face with the real Cheryl Brock, and he understood why 9 men had died at her hands. There was something fundamentally inhuman about her, a complete absence of empathy that made her more terrifying than any conventional criminal. I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, still playing his role, even as his hand moved slowly toward the panic button that would signal the assault team. Oh, please. Your neighbor Theodore. Did you really think a retired police detective would just happen to move in next door? My research on you is very thorough, Marcus. I know about his background, his specialties, his contacts in law enforcement. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. She'd known about Theodore all along. But here's what you didn't know, Cheryl continued, advancing on him with the syringe. Theodore Shelton isn't really retired. He's been hunting me for 5 years, ever since I killed his partner in Phoenix. This whole neighborhood setup was a trap, but not for me. For him. The room exploded into chaos as armed figures crashed through the windows. Chapter 7. The Real Trap. Marcus dubbed behind his desk as gunfire erupted throughout his house. The figures who'd smashed through the windows weren't law enforcement. They were armed mercenaries in tactical gear, moving with military precision to secure the room. Stand down, Cheryl shouted over the noise. I need him alive. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Theodore's voice. Abort. Abort. We've been compromised. But the earpiece went dead as one of the mercenaries activated a signal jammer. Marcus was now cut off from his backup, trapped in his own home with a serial killer and her heavily armed associates. Hello, Marcus, Cheryl said pleasantly, as if armed men hadn't just invaded his house. I told you we needed to talk. Marcus slowly stood up, hands raised, his mind racing through tactical options. 5 armed men had taken positions around the room, all wearing night vision goggles and carrying military-grade weapons. Their positioning suggested professional training, probably former military or law enforcement themselves. You've been very busy, haven't you? Cheryl moved closer, still holding the syringe. Working with the police, setting up surveillance, trying to be the hero. It's actually quite touching. Where are my children? Safe. For now. She gestured to one of the men, who produced a tablet showing a live video feed. Bradley and Emily were visible in what appeared to be the same cabin from the earlier photo, but now they were in a reinforced room with armed guards. Here's what's going to happen, Cheryl continued. You're going to inject yourself with this sedative, and then we're going to stage a very convincing suicide. The stress of your failing business, the guilt over your dead first wife, the discovery of some very compromising financial irregularities. It will all make perfect sense. And then I collect your life insurance, sell this house, and take your children on a nice long vacation to a country with no extradition treaties. Don't worry, they'll live long enough for me to establish a new identity somewhere else. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but forced himself to stay calm. What about Theodore? You said he was hunting you. Cheryl smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Theodore Shelton is about to have a very unfortunate accident. You see, when a retired police detective gets too close to the truth about a serial killer, sometimes the killer strikes first. By the time the authorities find his body, I'll be long gone. The sound of gunfire from outside suggested Theodore and the law enforcement team were under attack. Marcus had led them into a trap. Cheryl had been 3 steps ahead from the beginning, using their investigation against them. You've been planning this for a long time, Marcus said. Years. I've been watching Theodore's investigation, monitoring his communications, tracking his movements. When he started getting close, I realized I needed to eliminate him along with my current target. She gestured around the room. 2 birds, 1 stone. A serial killer's rampage that ends with her own death in a police shootout, leaving behind just enough evidence to close multiple cold cases, but not enough to trace my real identity. Your real identity? Oh, Marcus, you still don't understand, do you? Cheryl Brock was just another stolen identity, just like Stephanie Farmer. I've been doing this for so much longer than anyone realizes. One of the mercenaries spoke into his radio. Perimeter is secure. Local law enforcement neutralized. FBI command vehicle disabled. Marcus felt his heart sink. The entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. Theodore, Detective Gould, Agent McPherson, all the people who'd risked their lives to help him were now in mortal danger because he'd underestimated the intelligence and resources of the woman he'd married. Now, Cheryl said, holding out the syringe, let's get this over with. Your children are counting on your cooperation. Marcus took the syringe, his hands trembling with what appeared to be fear, but was actually barely controlled rage. 3 years of marriage to this monster. 3 years of sharing his bed with someone who'd been planning his murder from their first date. But more than that, she'd involved his children, threatened innocent law enforcement officers, and turned his life into an elaborate death trap. Before I do this, Marcus said, I need to know something. What? Did you ever feel anything real for me? Even for a moment. Cheryl considered the question seriously. You know, Marcus, you were actually one of my favorites. Usually, I can't wait to finish the job and move on. But with you, I found myself almost fond of the routine. Playing house, being a mother to your children, pretending to be normal. It was almost pleasant. Almost. But no, I don't feel love, Marcus. I don't feel guilt or remorse or attachment. I feel satisfaction when a plan works perfectly, and I feel annoyance when complications arise. Your neighbor created complications, so now he has to die. Your children are witnesses, so they have to die. You serve your purpose, so you have to die. She said it with no more emotion than someone discussing the weather. There's one thing I'm curious about, she continued. How did you figure it out? What gave me away? Marcus looked down at the syringe in his hand. The liquid inside was clear, probably a paralytic agent that would make him helpless while she arranged his body to simulate suicide. 1 injection, and he'd be unable to move, unable to fight back, unable to protect his children. You made one mistake, he said quietly. Oh, what mistake was that? Marcus looked up, and Cheryl was surprised to see that he was smiling. You assumed I was as helpless as your other victims. In one fluid motion, Marcus spun the syringe around and drove it into the neck of the nearest mercenary. The man collapsed instantly, his finger reflexively pulling the trigger and sending a burst of automatic fire into the ceiling. The room erupted into chaos as Marcus dove behind his desk again. But this time he wasn't seeking cover. He was accessing the hidden weapons cache he'd installed there during the 36 hours they'd had to prepare. The first mercenary to round the desk met the business end of a tactical shotgun. Kill him, Cheryl screamed, but her carefully planned execution had become a firefight, and Marcus Wells had just reminded everyone in the room why Army Rangers were considered among the world's most dangerous soldiers. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Marcus moved through his own house like a predator in familiar territory, using every tactical advantage his 3 years of living there had provided. He'd memorized every sight line, every piece of cover, every strategic position. The mercenaries were skilled, but they were operating in an unfamiliar environment against someone who trained for exactly this type of close-quarters combat. The second mercenary fell to a pistol shot as he tried to flank around the bookshelf. Marcus had positioned weapons caches throughout the house during the preparation period, knowing that if Cheryl discovered their trap, he'd need to be ready for a fight. "Bring the house down if you have to," Cheryl shouted from somewhere in the hallway. "Just kill him." Automatic weapons fire shredded the office furniture as Marcus rolled behind a steel filing cabinet he'd positioned specifically for cover. Return fire dropped a third mercenary who'd exposed himself too long while repositioning. Two left, plus Cheryl herself. Marcus activated the house's hidden fire suppression system, filling the rooms with obscuring foam while emergency strobes created a disorienting light show. In the chaos, he slipped out of the office through a pre-planned escape route that led to the basement. The basement was Marcus's kill zone. He'd spent months modifying it for exactly this scenario. Limited sight lines, multiple levels, and booby traps that could disable or eliminate intruders. The remaining mercenaries would have to come down after him, which meant abandoning their numerical advantage and entering his domain. "Marcus!" Cheryl's voice echoed from upstairs. "Your children die if you don't surrender right now." He ignored her, knowing that his children were already dead if he gave up. The only chance they had was if he eliminated the immediate threat and then went after the team holding them hostage. Heavy footsteps on the basement stairs announced the arrival of the fourth mercenary. Marcus waited in the shadows behind the water heater until the man descended far enough to commit to the staircase, then triggered the concealed explosive that brought down half the ceiling. The fourth mercenary survived the collapse, but was pinned and disoriented. Marcus finished him with a knife to minimize noise and preserve ammunition. One mercenary left, plus Cheryl. But as Marcus crept back toward the stairs, he heard something that chilled his blood, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside his house. Cheryl had brought reinforcements. "Time's up, Marcus," her voice called down the stairs. "My friends have arrived, and they're going to burn this house down with you in it. Last chance to surrender and save your children." Marcus checked his remaining ammunition. 2 magazines for the pistol, for shells for the shotgun. Not nearly enough if Cheryl had brought a full tactical team. But then he heard something beautiful, the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors approaching fast. "FBI, the house is surrounded." Agent McPherson's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." The cavalry had arrived. Marcus heard confusion and shouted orders from upstairs as Cheryl's reinforcements found themselves surrounded by federal agents. But he also heard Cheryl's voice, still calm and calculating. "Execute the backup plan. All units withdraw to the secondary location." The secondary location, where his children were being held. Marcus raced up the basement stairs, emerging into his destroyed living room just as Cheryl was heading for the back door. She turned as she heard him approach, pulling a pistol from her jacket. "You should have taken the easy way," she said, aiming at his chest. "Probably," Marcus agreed, then dove aside as she fired. The bullet missed by inches, and Marcus's return shot caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around but not dropping her. Cheryl was tougher than her elegant appearance suggested. She stumbled toward the back door, clutching her wounded shoulder. "You think you've won? Your children are in a cabin rigged with explosives. The moment my team realizes this operation has failed, they'll detonate the charges." Marcus felt ice in his veins. Where are they?" "Find them yourself," Cheryl snarled, raising her gun again. Marcus didn't hesitate. The shotgun blast at close range ended Cheryl Brock's killing spree permanently. But even as her body hit the floor, Marcus was already moving toward the front door. His children were somewhere in the mountains, guarded by an unknown number of armed killers who might execute them the moment they realized their boss was dead. Agent McPherson met him at the front door, tactical teams streaming into the house behind him. "Marcus, are you hurt?" "My children," Marcus gasped, adrenaline and desperation making it hard to speak clearly. "She said they're in a cabin with explosives. If her team realizes she's dead." "We monitored their radio communications," McPherson said quickly. We have units moving on their location now, but it's 40 miles into the mountains. Theodore appeared beside them, sporting a bandage on his forehead, but otherwise intact. Military helicopters are en route. We'll have your kids back within the hour. What if they detonate before we get there? They won't, Theodore said with grim certainty. These mercenaries aren't fanatics. They're professionals who work for money. With their employer dead, they'll be thinking about escape routes, not suicide missions. Agent McPherson was coordinating with multiple teams through his radio. Thermal imaging shows 4 subjects in the target cabin, 2 guards outside, 2 inside with what appear to be 3 children. 3 children. The kidnapped teenager from the carjacking was still alive too. How long? Marcus asked. 20 minutes for the helicopters to reach the cabin. Another 20 for the assault team to secure the area. Marcus looked at his destroyed house, at Cheryl's body being photographed by crime scene technicians, at the evidence of a battle that had nearly cost him everything. 40 minutes felt like forever when his children's lives hung in the balance. There's something else, Theodore said quietly. We found evidence in her car suggesting this wasn't just about you. She was planning something much bigger. What do you mean? Agent McPherson showed Marcus a tablet displaying documents recovered from Cheryl's vehicle. She had detailed files on 6 other potential victims in this area. Names, addresses, financial information, family details. You weren't her final target, Marcus. You were just her next target. Marcus stared at the list of names. Good men with families, successful professionals who would have made ideal prey for a predator like Cheryl Brock. If Theodore hadn't moved in next door, if he hadn't recognized what she was, how many more people would have died? Sir, Agent McPherson's radio crackled with an urgent voice. Alpha Team has visual on the target cabin, preparing for immediate assault. Marcus closed his eyes and waited for news that would either save his children or destroy his world. Chapter 9. Justice Served. Alpha Team, go, go, go. The radio transmission from the mountain cabin crackled with tension as Marcus, Theodore, and Agent McPherson listened from the FBI command center. 43 minutes had passed since Cheryl Brock's death, the longest 43 minutes of Marcus's life. Cabin secured. Hostiles down. We have 3 children, all alive, all responsive. Marcus felt his knees buckle with relief. Theodore caught his arm, steadying him as the radio continued with updates. Children appear unharmed. 2 males, 1 female, ages approximately 8 to 16. Requesting immediate medical evaluation. Bradley and Emily? Marcus whispered. Safe. Agent McPherson confirmed. Medical helicopter is en route to transport them to Cedar Falls General. You can meet them there. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the hospital, Theodore filled in the details that had emerged during the firefight at Marcus's house. Cheryl Brock, if that was even her real name, had been planning this operation for over 2 years. She didn't just target you randomly. She specifically chose Cedar Falls because of its proximity to the mountains, the demographics of the residents, and the limited law enforcement presence. She was setting up a hunting ground, Marcus realized. Exactly. You were victim number 1 in what would have been a systematic campaign of murders. She'd identified at least 6 potential targets, all wealthy men with minimal extended family connections. Agent McPherson added from the front seat, the mercenaries she hired are already talking. Turns out they were just hired muscle who thought they were working a kidnapping job. When they realized they were working for a serial killer, they surrendered without a fight. At the hospital, Marcus was reunited with his children in a scene that would stay with him forever. Bradley tried to be brave, but broke down crying the moment he saw his father. Emily clung to him like she'd never let go. The kidnapped teenager, Susan Ortiz, was also recovering well and would be reunited with her parents within hours. Dr. Clinton Herrera, the attending physician, confirmed that all 3 children were physically unharmed despite their ordeal. Some psychological trauma is to be expected, he explained, but children are remarkably resilient. With proper support, they should recover completely. Over the following weeks, as the investigation concluded and the media attention finally died down, Marcus learned the full scope of what they'd uncovered. Cheryl Brock had been responsible for at least 14 murders across 9 states over a period of 12 years. Her real identity remained a mystery. The earliest records investigators could find only went back 15 years, suggesting she'd been operating under stolen identities for her entire adult life. The FBI estimated that her total take from insurance payouts and inherited assets exceeded $20 million, most of which was recovered from accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. She was building towards something, Agent McPherson explained during one of their final debriefings. The pattern suggests she was planning to retire after one final, major score. Your life insurance policy would have been enough to set her up permanently in a non-extradition country. Theodore, who'd become a permanent fixture in the Wells family's life, had his own theory. I think she was getting bored with the routine. 14 kills over 12 years. She was escalating towards something more dramatic. Maybe a family massacre, maybe targeting multiple victims simultaneously. We'll never know for sure, but you stop something much worse than just another murder. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his rebuilt home office, looking out a yard where his children played safely under Theodore's watchful eye. The old detective had decided to stay in Cedar Falls permanently, becoming an unofficial grandfather to Bradley and Emily and a trusted friend to Marcus. The house had been completely renovated, every room scrubbed of the memories of that terrible night. But Marcus had kept one reminder, a framed photo of all the law enforcement officers who had risked their lives to save his family. Detective Gould had been wounded in the initial firefight, but recovered fully. Agent McPherson received a commendation for his coordination of the multi-agency response. And Theodore had been formally thanked by the FBI for his role in stopping one of the most prolific serial killers in recent history. "Dad, Theodore says he'll teach me to play chess," Emily announced, running into the office with grass stains on her new dress. "That sounds great, sweetheart," Marcus replied, scooping her up for a hug. "He also says that bad people sometimes pretend to be good people, but that good people like you and him can always tell the difference." Marcus looked out the window at Theodore, who was setting up a chess board on the patio table. The old detective had moved in next door by coincidence, but he'd stayed by choice, becoming the anchor that helped hold their rebuilt family together. "Theodore's right," Marcus told his daughter. "Good people can always tell the difference. It just takes time to learn how to look." That evening, as Marcus tucked his children into bed in their new, secure home, he reflected on the lessons of the past months. Trust was still possible, love was still real, and families could survive even the worst betrayals. The woman who'd called herself Stephanie Farmer had taken 3 years of his life and nearly destroyed everything he cared about, but she hadn't won. Marcus Wells had proven that predators who thought they were hunting sheep sometimes discovered they'd cornered a wolf instead. And as he turned off the lights in his children's rooms, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: complete peace. The monster was dead, his family was safe, and justice had been served. The perfect neighbor had helped him find his way home. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.